One of the great joys in my life is that writing about false friends has given me some true ones. People who are eager like I am to make sure that Bible readers understand the King James Version. One friend who is a pastor in Singapore sent me one of the best examples of false friends in the King James Version that I've seen in a while. It's the word communicate. And I want you to do what I hope to make a tradition in this False Friends series. Stop now and write down in a comment on this video right away what you think communicate means in the verse I'm about to read to you, Hebrews 13:16. But to do good and to communicate, forget not, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. I will sing a little barbershop music for you while I wait, because it's probably the national music of Singapore, I guess maybe.
We'll build a rainbow in the sky.
That was probably distracting to sing barbershop while you were trying to think, which is why a lot of students don't do as well on math in Singapore as they would otherwise. Too much barbershop while studying. Okay, let's try to keep this one short. Step 1. Notice a possible false friend either through contextual conflict or through regular checking of other major modern English evangelical Bible translations. There will be some good King James readers out there who realize that our modern sense of the word communicate doesn't fit well in Hebrews 13:16. They'll see that it's odd to say that to communicate is a sacrifice with which God is well pleased. Now, there are some husbands out there who really don't like to talk in more than monosyllables and grunts when they come home from work. Sometimes my wife wishes I were one of those kinds of husbands, but for them, communicating is a sacrifice. But still, this is just a funny thing to say. We've got a contextual conflict that good readers will notice. Now, how many people who read this in the King James Version this very day are this kind of good reader? I really don't know. But I feel reasonably sure that I myself did not pick up on this one when I was an exclusive reader of the King James Version. I just don't think I noticed this contextual conflict. Step 2 is look up the Hebrew or Greek word in a responsible original language lexicon. The word translated communicate here in the original is actually a noun, though the King James translators rendered it as a verb, which is just fine, something you have to do sometimes in order to produce natural English. BDAG says that this noun here means an attitude of goodwill that manifests an interest in a close relationship. Generosity, fellow feeling, altruism. I'm thinking generosity is the sense here because most translations today go with share. Here is one, the NIV. Do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. I couldn't find any even moderately well-known contemporary English Bible translations that used a word other than share here. Step 3, look up the English word in a contemporary dictionary to discover what it can mean today. In today's English, communicate can't mean share your stuff or be generous. It's intransitive in this verse in Hebrews, meaning it has no object. The King James Version here in this verse doesn't tell people what to communicate, in other words. And the only really common sense of communicate that is intransitive is to express oneself in such a way that one is readily and clearly understood. This American Heritage Dictionary gives the example sentence, that ability to communicate was strange in a man given to long, awkward silences. Merriam-Webster does mention that the transitive form of the verb had an archaic sense meaning share. That was the only one of the 3 contemporary dictionaries I checked. The other was the New Oxford American Dictionary that comes on every Mac. That was the only one to record this particular sense, and it labeled it archaic. It's the best hope a King James reader has of understanding what's going on here in Hebrews 13:16, unless he or she knows Greek or checks other translations, or thinks to check the Oxford English Dictionary. Step 4 is to look up the King James word here in the Oxford English Dictionary to discover what the word could mean in 1611. I've gotten pretty used to saying sure enough at this point in the video, and sure enough, there's an intransitive sense of communicate that fits the Greek word and this context perfectly. It's sense 6b. It's marked as intransitive, and it says, to have a common part or share, to partake, participate, share with another person, frequently within the thing shared, also with or occasionally of. In other words, these are the prepositions that are often used with this verb. And wouldn't you know it, the OED marks this sense as obsolete. Now, there are, I would say, 2 verses in the King James New Testament that use the word communicate in such a way as to show that back then in 1611 it could mean share physical goods or money. Context provides good clues in those places that the King James translators intended to use this obsolete sense mentioned in the OED. Here's an example. Let him that is taught in the word communicate unto him that teacheth in all good things, Galatians 6:6. That's a little obscure and will trip up some readers. Communicate, that is, share in all good things. But in context, it can only mean communicating money or food, that is, sharing tangible goods. Then there's Philippians 4:15. Now ye Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but ye only. I'd say that's a bit obscure too. Communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving will definitely make some people think the Philippians talked to Paul about giving and receiving. But some very sharp readers will, I think, get what the King James translators actually intended here. They'll sort of pick up from context then this older sense that we don't use anymore. But then there are other places where I think you'd have to be a pretty amazing Englisher to understand what communicate meant in 1611. Like in the previous verse of Philippians. Here it is. Notwithstanding, ye have well done that ye did communicate with my affliction. Philippians 4:14. Even knowing that communicate can mean share, or here I think share in, I have a hard time making my brain understand this to mean anything other than the Philippians talking back and forth with Paul's affliction. The modern sense of communicate is just so well ingrained in my brain from almost 40 years of use, it's just hard to reprogram myself even after checking the OED. And I think we've got precisely the same kind of false friend in 1 Timothy 6:18 as we had in our main verse, Hebrews 13:16. Here it is. That they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate. Now that we know communicate is a potential false friend, the meaning is obvious here. They need to be ready to share. But I dare say that if you ask 10 people in your church and 10 people on the street, 25 of them will assume that it means willing to share their thoughts with others. Sorry for my math there, I didn't take Singapore math when I was in high school. The modern translations say, you have done well to share with me in my affliction. That's the New American Standard Bible. I find that to be a good deal easier to understand than the King James rendering. Now, I know what defenders of the exclusive use of the King James will say to me after watching this video. They will say that reading the other examples of the word communicate in the New Testament will help make sure that readers understand communicate in Hebrews 13:16 and other more obscure passages. But here's the whole point of false friends, a point that I haven't seen anyone answer yet. Who does this? Who looks up words they already know when the senses they know work well enough in context? Not most people. And that's what makes communicate in Hebrews 13:16 and several other passages in the King James Version a false friend. I want to know what you thought it meant before you watched the video. But now that you have watched the video, hopefully thou understandest what thou readest in the King James Version a little better.